I only had a few hours to look at Ouroboros Genesis, the preprint. And I have to say I'm pretty impressed. It's the first thing that seems to attack the actual security assumptions that Bitcoin is satisfying. I wanted to ask about the concrete security of the protocol. There's this notion of alert participants, ones who have received all the information about the blockchain as it is right now, and the security parameters depend on how many of them there are as a fraction of the total participants, and the delay, the network delay. So concretely, suppose I am a state-level actor, or suppose I'm just a very good hacker, and suppose I can partition the network. I can make sure that people don't talk to each other with different amounts of stake for some amount of time. Let's say I can partition the network into like 4 pieces with equal stake. How long do I have to do that, and how much stake do I have to have before I can create a problem, before I can, with some probability, some reasonable probability, like violate the security assumptions of the network?
Yeah, all right. So, I mean, clearly, like, just answer this question, like, precisely. That would need, like, a whiteboard and, like, us sitting together and discussing this. So, I think, like, what's important, like, in terms of how do you address that, is that in the paper, we lay out all the tools with which someone can work out this calculation. So we have a specific relationship between the network delay and how this affects the advantage, the potential advantage, let's say, that the adversary gets over, let's say, the remaining parties. So this is something that can be worked out for a specific network. Now, doing an exact parameterization of Ouroboros Genesis is not something that we're doing yet. So in terms of implementation, this will be the next stage for us. But what we have basically is all the formulas that will be used to do this parameterization. So in other words, all the parameters that are relevant here are the network delay and the perceived number of alert parties over the number of parties that are active, as well as intrinsic parameters in the protocol that reflect how often slots are elected for being active in the protocol, which in some sense, if you want, is a similar parameter with the way Bitcoin works. Even though the parameters that we have in Genesis, and also Ouroboros in general, enable a much more fast block generation rate as compared, let's say, to the 10-minute rate of Bitcoin.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi. What I wanted to ask is about the Cardano project. What do you think non-devs guys should be doing to promote it?
I guess it depends on what road you're walking. So are you a speculator? Are you an evangelist? Are you somebody who wants to build a project, even though you're not a developer? Do you have a DApp idea? So can you be more specific about what road are you coming from?
Just to get to a distributed economy and liberate people, I guess.
Right.
That's the general direction.
So then we have to drill further down. Like, what exactly do we mean by distributed economy, and under what context? Like, which place? Like, distributed economy of Israel or the United States? Because these things are highly contextual, right? See, the thing about these protocols is they're protocols. They're just code and ideas and rules, and they're run by people, and they're run in contexts and environments. And what we do at IOHK is we tend to separate the two, and we say, okay, for the protocols, build them in the most abstract ways possible and try to get a deep understanding of where they fail and where they work. And then the engineering side tries to tune them for particular products. So in the case of Cardano, you have a very broad mandate of saying, could we put this into a country, for example? But that's not going to happen. There's no country that's going to just wake up and say, hey, Charles, we really love your TED Talk. We'd like to go ahead and just throw everything away and adopt what you have. No, it usually starts in pieces like, hey, we have a huge property fraud problem where in rural farms people are going and changing the property ledger to steal the land so that they can go and develop it or to mine it or to take oil off of it. So boy, it'd be really nice if we had some sort of property registration blockchain solution, or a more practical one that we've actually done. There's a collection of Greek universities that were exploring how to reduce academic fraud, where people were claiming they had degrees and they didn't actually have them, or maybe they didn't have what they claim they have, and so they wanted to have a blockchain solution to verify degrees, so that if you go to your employer, they can do that easily without getting paper transcripts. So you start there, and then what ends up happening is those solutions give you a ladder to get to the next solution, to the next solution, and so forth. You know, the problem with Bitcoin is, well, the speculation side and the payment side of the system actually was really exciting, and it got a lot of people involved. It was actually the worst example of the technology, because at the end of the day, it's really unclear if you're ever going to get value stability with the way Bitcoin's economics work. So you can't really use it as a good payment system, or as a good means of exchange or a credit store. So when you actually go and try to replace the US dollar, it just is incompatible. So you get to a certain point and people find it interesting, but they say it's not practical, and they tend to ignore it and think that you failed in your solution. When in reality, it was actually an amazing accomplishment. You could teleport digital gold basically anywhere in the world at a low fee. Never before in human history have we been able to do that, but people kind of missed the boat. So to answer your question, you have to get to specifics, and you start there. And then there's always a personal itch. So the value of the platform I build is directly connected to how accessible it is to solve the problems that you happen to have. That was the magic of Ethereum. When we relaunched Ethereum, it was the first time in the cryptocurrency space that people could actually do something interesting without having to deal with Bitcoin script or other things, which was really inaccessible. They said, here's a programming language. It kind of looks a little bit like JavaScript. Go have fun with that. Now, a lot of people made a lot of horrible decisions and mistakes, but that's okay. It was your decision and mistake to make. It was just like when JavaScript came to the web browser. You know, a lot of people wrote horrifically insecure applications that did all kinds of horrible things, but it was your horrifically insecure application. And every now and then you get a Facebook or a Gmail or something like that. So for my job, my side of it is to give you good tools. And then your side of it is to start with very specific problems that you happen to want to solve. And then it's an interplay where we watch and we learn from those problem solving, and we iterate the tools to make them better suited, and we learn from the mistakes that we've made. And to be frank, there's been tremendous progress in the cryptocurrency space. There's tens of thousands of dApps that have been deployed, huge amounts of projects all around. There's these conferences now have thousands of people attending them with actual real products that are doing interesting things. There's a lot of junk and fluff, I should say, and there's a lot of scams, and there's $6 billion of ICOs. Probably not all of them are fully legitimate, but at the end of the day, there's going to be some winners that actually show off everything, and those will drive the market.
I'm trying to ask the same question about the proof of stake, and I'm looking at it from the economic end of it. To make it simple, I would say you can't dump into the market a mining farm, okay? So you're securing your system by the fact that the economy behind it is not something that is market, can go with the market craze. It takes some time, okay, it might, if the value of the tokens go down, or the Bitcoin goes down, then you say, okay, it's not worth for me to operate the mining farm, and I'm operating less, but it is a longer process. With proof of stake, it's almost like you submit the whole ecosystem into the crazy market, because you can basically dump your assets right away in the next block. And from being like a system of a lot of secured strong point, you can become a very weak system because you just dump your assets. Am I clear enough?
Yes, thank you for the question. So first of all, like proof of stake systems, just because there is assets which are being moved does not necessarily mean that the stake that supports the system like follows in a heartbeat the way that assets move. All the protocols that are actually being considered, including Ouroboros, the protocol I presented, Snow White and others, they just use a concept that they freeze the stake at a certain point, and then they use that stake in order to advance the protocol. So asset movement that happens in an instant does not have an immediate impact in how the protocol works. Of course, this does not completely address the concern you have. You still have the issue of entities that have stake at a certain point and they may be compromised or otherwise. What happens is that there is an array of cryptographic tools that are being used in the protocol, in the design of these protocols, that try exactly to address this concern. Now, ultimately, all these systems, once we stop to have an interest in them, they eventually die. Now, the thing is that in all these systems, it's very difficult to control against very rapid changes. Bitcoin itself has a lot of stability problems the moment you have a very big difference in terms of hashing power. So there's a sudden dip. This is an opportunity for the protocol to be disrupted, and similar things could happen in the case of POS. So even though like this is a concern, these protocols, they have a built-in resiliency against immediate changes. And I have to say that many of these changes in the case of POS do happen via exchanges who could be capable of regulating the flow of assets. So exchanges, being like essentially members of that wider community that runs a POS system, could be the mediators of the speed that assets do change hands. And we've seen, as we've seen like in other cases in traditional economies, when we are in periods of crisis, it could be the case that exchanges and other community-based efforts, they limit the flow of assets with the objective to protect the stability of the system in a certain crisis. No, it's actually the same asset. It's not different. It's just that the asset that protects the proof-of-stake algorithm is snapshot at a certain moment, and this is the one that protects the algorithm. So basically, it's like imagine in the sequence of time going forward, the assets are frozen at specific instances, and these are the one that protect the system. So the on-stake majority is assumed in these freeze points, which happen at regular intervals, let's say on a daily basis or a couple of or a couple of days, let's say, depending on a particular protocol parameterization.
So imagine a thought experiment for a moment that you have two proof-of-work chains that use the same protocol, and they're about equal value, okay? And you have a functioning derivatives market, and you can short sell. So if you're a miner, and let's say you have 51% of the hash power, so you could choose to be honest with both of these chains and mine them equally proportioned, or be a 51% actor in one chain or the other chain. Well, you don't have any loyalty to chain alpha or beta. You're a mercenary. Miners are mercenaries. They don't altruistically mine. It's a business. So what you could do to profit is just mine chain alpha and destroy chain beta through, a 51% attack and destroy its price. And before you do that, buy a whole bunch of options on the short side for that. It's called a Goldfinger attack, a desire to destroy a currency for some reason. Now, you've completely wrecked that entire currency, and the worst thing is they can't fire you without compromising their long-term security. Why? Because they can change the proof-of-work algorithm, but there's no guarantee they would be able to get an equivalent amount of work with the new system. Furthermore, you as the miner have lost nothing. You've actually gained a large profit from destroying that other chain. Why? Because you can mine chain alpha and still derive a profit because these chains have equivalent price. So that's one of the hazards of proof of work, is we tend to think that these people are adding some, but they're just mercenaries, they're service providers, and they have absolutely no loyalty or connection to the system that they happen to be mining. Now, the advantage that Bitcoin has is it's the largest and it's the only one in its class of that scale. But if there was an alternative to Bitcoin, like Bitcoin 2, and it was of roughly the same amount of hash power, this would be a viable attack, especially with functioning derivatives markets, and it would be very profitable attack if you think about it. The second thing is proof of stake. You can fire bad actors through a fork. Seldom mentioned, but it's actually a good technique. Let's say you have great distribution of money. 49% of all your stake is incredibly well distributed, very egalitarian, beautiful Gini coefficient. But then 51% is owned by Bob, and Bob's an asshole. And so Bob tries to wreck everything and cause you to have a bad day. All the non-Bob people can get together and just get rid of Bob's stake and create Coin 2.0, the Bob-free edition. It's the no homers of cryptocurrencies. Well, guess what you've just done? You've actually made your system more secure by firing Bob, because the remaining people now have 100% of the supply, and it's much more distributed and so forth, and there's less of a chance of having a Bob. And people know the consequence of being Bob. So they proactively don't be Bob, right? You cannot do this in a proof of work system. You have to change the algorithm, and then you lose all those miners that you've disenfranchised. So it's careful to understand what you're inviting when you invite proof of work. You're inviting an external actor who has something outside of your network and no material connection to that network to give you security. And they can do that as long as you pay them. But just like Rome learned when they started moving from Roman legions to mercenary armies, sometimes the Visigoths make more money sacking Rome than they do defending Rome. Similarly, sometimes the miners make more destroying your chain than they do defending your chain. And that's something that in the long term I think could become an issue.
Oh, yeah. A couple of like words on proof of work miners and proof of stake forgers and so on. Miners are mercenaries, and they will kill weak chains if it's in their interest to do so. And those chains are going to die anyway, and it might as well be quickly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the same protocol. You mean the same hash function. In the case of specialization, ASIC-based specialization, then there's kind of difficult for that to happen for like the second chain, let's say, using the same hash function, which is already using specialized hardware to gain a similar cap. And if it does, then the other chain will die. But oh yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. There is one other thing. A mined currency that fired its miners. I think Monero did that a few weeks ago. They had the same hash function, I believe, for quite some time. And Bitmain announced that they would be releasing an ASIC for it. And I can't remember his name. Richard. The developer of Monero was not in favor of having his coin mined by ASICs, and he used his authority to persuade, I believe, the great majority of people to fork that miner off the chain. Now you're right, there were other miners that were disenfranchised, but because they were all using GPUs, and because the target algorithm was also GPU mineable, they weren't disenfranchised relative to anyone else. In other words, they may have seen a temporary reduction in their hash power, but eventually, of course, they would have been able to mine on equal terms.
My whole argument is that even if you fire the miners, this is never a positive thing. You don't actually gain security because you're removing available hash power and you're getting a subset of it. And you might encourage people from other sources to come, but it's a sum-zero game, so somebody has to lose for you to be able to recover your security. You're reducing the total global amount of hash power available to secure your chain. And the entire security argument of proof of work is more is better. So every time you try to fire somebody, you actually lose something. Either somebody's losing it to augment you, or you just lose it and you go from 50 to 40 or whatever your measurement is, right? So that's the problem. And also these are contentious events. So Monero is kind of very centralized around a small group of developers who are very passionate and they have a strong community. So they tended to agree with this decision. But with the case of Ethereum, it got too big for its britches, so even a small change resulted in the creation of Ethereum Classic, and about 10% of the population went there. So what's to stop Monero Classic from occurring? So in your effort to mitigate a concern, you end up creating two currencies which now have two governance structures, and they kind of trade and compete with each other and don't like each other. It was a very contentious event with Ethereum, and that's just bad. Whereas in the proof of stake case, it doesn't seem like you would actually have that occur. You fire Bob, and the exchanges are probably going to go with the remainder of the people. So, sure, a chain of one person, and that chain would have no value. But you know that 51% of the stake is malicious. So if it's Bob or a consortium of 1,000 people, you know they're bad actors, and you can cut them out. Yes, they would. A chain of malicious actors. Markets control value. Exchanges don't. They just provide the markets. and they're going to suddenly become honest and have utility, and everybody's going to encourage and use it. Value comes from people, not from the tokens and not from the protocols. People. So wherever the people go, the values go. There was equal amounts of Ether Classic as there was Ethereum. More people agreed with Vitalik than me, and therefore Vitalik won that fight because he had the people.
Yeah, Charles, I wouldn't be so down on yourself. I think Ethereum Classic hasn't lost merely because it has less hash power, less total market capitalization. It's still fulfilling a purpose for those people who want to use it. And while there may not be exactly the same kind of disagreements in a proof of stake blockchain, reasonable people can still disagree, and a proof of stake blockchain can still fork for reasons that are completely exogenous, external to matters of hash power and rights to issue tokens and so on. I suppose it depends on, is it to be considered malicious merely because fewer people are using it. If a chain is forked by malicious actors who are commonly known to be malicious and commonly acknowledged to be malicious, then that fork will not be much use to them. However, if it is forked by very intelligent malicious actors who have a marketing team, then perhaps things will be different.
Yeah, so it's just the eternal debate. Do you want your security to be in the system or outside of the system? I don't like mercenaries. I don't like having actors who are in control of my system who have no intrinsic stake within my system. I just don't like that. It to me feels like there's going to be all kinds of interesting problems that occur there. Whereas in proof of stake, you make decisions based upon something you already own. And if you try to hurt the system, you're going to kill your own value. Yeah, that's always the fact of it. And so you're probably going to act in the best interest of the system. Or else if you don't, you destroy the value of the system, which means you're burning money in your own pocket. In a miner, it's like you have options. You can go to alpha or beta or gamma. And if these are like GPU mining, for example, you mentioned as an example, would you really care if you can go and mine Ether over Monero? So why would you care about the value of one or the other? You don't hold the tokens. You just get the rewards, and you sell them as soon as you get them. You're not vested. Interoperability, because guess what? We're going to disagree. And that's why there's not going to be one standard to rule them all. Some people legitimately believe in proof of work, and proof of work will get more advanced. Algorithms will get more sophisticated, more ASIC resistant. If you don't want to have mining pools, there's things called non-outsourceable puzzles. You could read papers from Andrew Miller on that. There's also ideas of creating decentralized mining pools. Smart Pool was one example from Loy Liu. So there's a whole line of research to make proof of work better and even useful. For example, there's a paper, I think it's called Useful Proof of Work, and one of the authors is from Berkeley that talks about solving certain hard problems with it. So it is viable, and there's people who believe in it. I just happen to believe that there might be a better way of doing things, but you disagree, which means that your token you're supporting has some people and economic support behind it, which means it'll continue to have market value, which means it'll continue to survive. And 5-10 years from now, it probably will continue to survive.
Don't get me wrong, I say both will have purposes. I also involved in proof of stake things, but for example, Steemit. Proof of stake's great for that when it's just about valuing blog posts and stuff like that. But you want to run a real financial network on it, then that's, that might want to be attacked. That's a different story. I think, like any of these things, both will continue to coexist. But the idea that proof of work's going to disappear, I don't think that's right. Anyway, I should stop talking.
Okay, this is fun debate. Thank you.
Do we have a proof of stake a financial something that's working currently? Because Cardano is on development. It's not actually being...
like a version of Ouroboros is running in Cardano right now. Just we've locked delegation to our nodes, and we're gradually decentralizing. But it's actual Ouroboros. It's running. It has epochs, and there's random number generation using Bernardo's algorithm scrape. And
but
it's not
decentralized. It's not state.
Yeah, because it's been locked to us by design. We were not crazy. You don't create a new protocol and just release it. You have to gradually decentralize it.
If there is outside a system that is tested for, Bitcoin is like.
Sure, but it depends on what you mean by proof of stake. You have delegated proof of stake, bonded proof of stake, peer proof of stake, right? For peer proof of stake, the NXT people will argue their system is running, and it's been running since 2013. It's 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then Dan Larimer will tell you BitShares is awesome, and Steem is awesome, and EOS is awesome, and there's lots of transactions happening in that system. So there's some evidence that maybe DPoS is reasonable. The Tendermint guys will tell you that they're the best thing since sliced bread and point out to a whole bunch of systems that they've deployed in the permission space that do
Which
that.
one? Which one?
Tendermint.
Okay.
Yeah, Jay Kwan's work and so forth. I think he has Cosmos now, or the heck that is. And Ouroboros is the latest and greatest, and it uses a lot of heavyweight crypto because there's some heavyweight cryptographers behind it. And they happen to solve some really prominent problems, which means it takes a little bit longer to get such a thing to market. So it just depends what your burden of proof happens to be. Some are empirical, where they say, does it run and how long has it run for? Some are academic, saying, has it gone through peer review, and have really bright people looked at it. And some are kind of a hybrid of the system in a value sense. Like, are there any proof of stake currencies that are worth a lot of money? That's a different metric. And at the moment, proof of work currencies are worth more than proof of stake currencies. So if that's your metric, POW is the winner.
Which is the bigger POS?
What was that?
The biggest value.
POS? Let's see here. Yeah, I was going to say EOS when it launches will probably be the largest, but because it's in ERC20 right now.
No, that's
Yeah, but
actually
then-
running. Okay.
But historically, there was things like Peercoin and NXT, and they were in the top 10. And I guess it depends on however you want to call Ripple and whatever the hell that thing is. You can. I'm not sure what their consensus algorithm is, to be honest with you. But actually, Ethereum will probably be the largest POS soon. I mean, they're moving towards Casper, and that's a transition, but it'll happen. They're very dogged on it. We're obviously in the top 10, and we're a POS currency. And so Cardano is technically the largest POS at the moment at 9 billion. Huzzah.
Hi. So it's a great segue to my question. It's a question for both of the projects. Both of you are doing something that's very research-driven. So the development, there's a lot of research to it, a lot of academia, and the life cycle of research is in years, like you showed work published over a few years. And on the other side, you have the market that acts in cycles of weeks. So how do you kind of balance between those two? And a bonus question to Cardano, how does this affect you day to day, the fact that you're worth $9 billion? And would you, if you could go back, choose not to deploy the token yet and kind of postpone it so you could be more ready to all of this?
So we're working on a number of applications that can be built on top of the blockchain, apart from just cryptocurrencies and value transfer. So we're working on a class of algorithms that will allow you to build basically, in an intuitive way, you could have smart contracts where the inputs are kept private. So you reach an output that depends on these people's inputs, but those inputs are never revealed. But it sounds paradoxical, but it's where the interesting crypto comes in, is that you can publicly verify that this output was obtained from people's private inputs without ever looking at them or leaking them. So that will allow you to build things such as proper decentralized exchanges with cryptographic security, where we can actually argue mathematically that security will hold. It's not just a matter of trusting one actor or another or some economical forces. And it will enable any range of applications that you might think of where you need some kind of privacy and still public verifiability.
The Tokyo Tech Lab has just been killing it. They're doing amazing MPC research. It's really cutting edge, and it's something that's kind of new to the cryptocurrency space. There's very few projects that focus on this, like Enigma is one. And if you just look pound for pound, we're able to get stuff out quickly. And I think these things have gone through peer review. There was ACNS was one.
The ethos of your presentation was that Diffie-Hellman took 30 years to perfect.
Right. Okay. That's
an academic ethos.
Yeah.
Okay? So and you take that and you're saying we're going to ship something in 6 months. How do you cope with that cognitive dissonance? That's
you accept that what you have might be broken.
But it's worth $9 billion.
But
So
hang on. Hey, let's walk through this carefully. So you can either just build something, hope you got it right, release it, let the market tell you if you got it right, and hand your ass to it. Or You can go through some form of a process, and that process gives you a higher degree of assurance that what you've constructed is correct. And then the natural question is, well, what assurance level do you need? Peer review is one. Is that done? No, it doesn't mean that you've implemented it correctly. You could write it in a functional language. That's another level. Or you could write a formal specification and then carefully follow the spec and implement it and do some good testing. You could then prove the specifications bisimilar to the implementation, like they did with SCL4, and that can take 5 to 10 years. Okay, and if you do that, well, okay, maybe you're got a pretty good product, but it has no practicality and the market doesn't like it. So you have to find a trade-off between where is the sweet spot. So our core argument at IOHK is no matter what you're doing, if you're making a science claim, that science claim must be incubated within the right environments, and there must be at least some notion of peer review to that scientific claim. A third party that has no stake in it has to look at it and say that this is somewhat reasonable. Now, the reality of academia, though, is that just because you've gone through peer review, just because you've gone to a conference, doesn't mean what you've proposed is right. All the time, people find flaws or problems or issues. All the time. And so you have to accept that it takes a long time for you to actually be able to get things to be very solid. It takes 30 years or 40 years for people to accept things. A great paper to read from Neil Koblitz. It's called The Serpentine Path of Elliptic Curve Crypto, where he talks about some of his personal challenges of getting elliptic cryptography adopted. This is a great conceptual idea. It's faster, smaller key sizes. Everything about it seems like this is a way to go. But there was a great degree of resistance and skepticism, and it took quite a bit of time for him to get to a point where people actually accepted elliptic curve as a legitimate way to go, right? And guess what? We're going through this all over again now. There's this notion of post-quantum cryptography. And everybody understands that we have to at some point move from RSA and EC and these systems to newer systems like hash-based crypto and lattice crypto and these newfangled signatures. And they have all kinds of proofs, provable security and so forth about them. Yet somehow, some way, people are very skeptical and find problems all the time. So peer review is not God, and it doesn't give you truth. But you have to look at the alternative, where we're at in the space. Somebody takes a paper, usually written in a very imprecise way. They're not familiar with it, they implement it, and then they claim it solved every single problem. In my view, IOTA is a great example of this. They took a paper called Tangle, which was written by a good guy, Sergei Popov. He's an interesting...
I'll just say that I'm a core developer at IOTA.
Okay.
So just so we can...
Okay.
But go on.
No, okay, well, so I'll be very frank then. You guys had an interesting paper, okay? You released the paper, and you implement it. Good. Does this mean IOTA's great, and it's going to scale to millions of transactions per second? It's solved every single problem in the entire space. There's no flaws in it. And when independent third-party people review it, that they haven't found any problems? What I've seen from your community, to be frank, has been very troublesome. The DCI affair. Instead of, I go through security audits. A lot of people in the space go through security audits. It happens all the time. I sometimes disagree with the auditor. There's an auditor in the audience right now auditing IOHK and Cardano, and FP Complete doesn't always say nice things about us. That's the nature of auditing. We have disagreements, but I don't threaten to sue them. Okay, so this is my core issue sometimes with certain projects. Not to pick on IOTA, but just I'm pointing it out as an egregious issue where massively unrealistic claims are being made. Feeless transactions, unlimited scalability, perfect security, no flaws whatsoever. And anybody who has the audacity to say maybe there's something wrong with that is brutally attacked on Twitter. I have been brutally attacked on Twitter. People are now claiming that I am paying people to attack IOTA. I've seen hundreds of tweets about this on my Twitter feed. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And then auditors are sued? Shame on you guys. I rely on auditors to actually get my product to work. And if that relationship's damaged, the InfoSec community is not going to audit my stuff. They're just going to go do something else because they're going to be worried about being ostracized or attacked or sued. Okay? So getting back to my broader point, scientific claims, claims about performance, claims about security, claims about scalability, these things need to be verified through some sort of meaningful process that's double-blind, that has some form of independence about it, that has some sort of credibility about it. If it's not an ISA conference, then do something else. But for the love of God, just don't say something.
Furthermore, code claims need to be audited by third parties. And when flaws are discovered, you have to be intellectually honest about these particular flaws. My biggest issue in the space is this is not happening. I see it with EOS as well, to pick on them too. I'm an equal opportunity picker, where these guys claim 1 million transactions per second and 500 millisecond block times. It's insanity. It takes 300 milliseconds to send a signal around the entire Earth. And how are you going to send an entire block? Unless you can do 1 million transactions per second, they're a kilobyte per transaction. That's a gigabyte per fucking block every second being broadcast around the entire damn Earth. How do you even stay up to date with that? Yet they say this, and they've raised over $1 billion from this. They have a whole cult of personality around it, and there's no third-party validation of their claims. The latest offender's hash graph. It may be an interesting protocol, and they're going around saying the same damn things. You see the recurring pattern here, where there's some good ideas. Tangle is a good idea, but it does need some massaging, just like Ouroboros did. Could you imagine if we just launched the Ouroboros paper back in 2016 and said, we solved proof of stake, all the problems of proof of stake are over, infinitely scalable, everything's great? No. We did Prouse and then Genesis, and there's many more papers to publish, and it'll take years before the community has any notion of acceptance. The miner is still skeptical. Did we convince him at all? No, and he's going to be skeptical for another 10 years, maybe never. That's how this game works.
So could you put that in context with the token? So you are, like, among other things, in charge of a token.
But I'm not in charge of the price. I'm not in charge of the markets. The markets have valued the project based on the personnel, my track record, a litany of other factors, geopolitical factors, the fact that we have regulatory insulation, the fact that we're in good markets. You know, these are facts and circumstances, and every token is different. Am I worth $9 billion? Is Bitcoin worth $100 billion? That's the point. I don't know. The market told me that. Is the market rational? Is it $20,000 Bitcoin rational?
I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just asking how that affects your day-to-day work. Because
it's great, because what it does is it makes me terrified. It means that I now have a $9 billion ecosystem every day I got to wake up to. And I have to work harder and smarter. And I have to get more partnerships. And I have to get better developers. And we have to do stronger research. So it's a big kick in the ass. And I'm not going to lie, it'd be great if it was a $10 million cryptocurrency that no one gave a shit about. This was just an R&D project, and who cares if the paper takes 2 years to publish? No one's paying attention. When you're $9 billion, everybody watches you, and that's just that. And it's good for the people in the ecosystem because it means we have an incentive to work harder, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fundamental ethos of the company, which is if we make scientific claims, we validate them. If we write code, we try to have it audited. And where it's possible, we try to write specifications for the things we do, which are implementation independent, so we have a higher probability of reduction of bugs. That's the core ethos. Whether we work on Zencash, which is a very small market cap relative to Cardano or Ethereum Classic, we follow the same process. For Mantis, for example, at the moment, IOHK holds no ETC, 0 tokens of ETC. We still created Mantis, we still released Mantis, and had it go through a security audit by Kadelsky, and publicly released that audit. They had some issues. We fixed them, and we didn't sue them.
I just to clarify, the IOTA Foundation isn't suing any researcher. It's like a personal beef between 2 researchers. But I get your sentiment, and I'm totally behind that.
I mean, they're real people, man. I was just at MIT, and I met Ethan Hellman, and I talked to Neha and the DCI people, and they've just been terribly vilified. They're real people, and they say, oh, there's a conflict of interest and all this other stuff. They're just academics. I meet them every day. I work with them every day, and it's damaged the reputation of IOTA, this whole affair.
Thank you, Charles. Just to clarify, IOTA, I don't give a tinker's cuss about anything that's going on with IOTA. Not involved with it. I do think there's some space to talk about how philosophies are different when you've got a different team, a different market cap, and so on. We're 10 guys right now. Maybe we'll be 20 soon, and that's going to be a big deal for us. We can't afford to have to churn out 10 research papers a year, even if they're extremely good ones. We see ourselves as engineers, and engineers tend not to implement papers that either don't exist yet or that came out 2 weeks ago. The things we're focusing on, the value add we're doing, like the resource bounds even. Resource bounds have been around for at least, I think, 10, 13, 15 years. Yeah. Yes, but it's been reviewed like a long time ago. Alright, it's true.
The touching algorithm is just a variant of Andy Miller. It's based on other functional languages. Things move one pace at a time. Yeah, you work on the SR project. Yeah. Did you ever work with Markov? I've never met him in person, but yes, through the FSOP, GitHub, I suppose, through the open source project.
He works at IOHK. That's our connection.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But that's the point. You guys took proven technology that has gone through peer review or supported by a colossal company that has huge amounts of resources. You took that and built a great product on top of it. So if you don't do it in-house, you still have to build on a solid foundation. You don't take a shaky foundation and build on top.
No,
that's my entire point.
That's absolutely right. You have to have something that isn't going to crumble in your hands, it focuses the mind. You have to focus on delivering value in a well-defined field. We've got the financial focus. Even our mining, our multi-hash mining, which is an innovation. But it's not a complete innovation, and also it's not the sort of thing that can just crumble to pieces immediately, because it's still based on proof of work. If you want to do research, then that's great. I'm from an academic background to some extent, but you should also know your limitations. You can't reinvent the wheel by yourself and implement it by yourself and have it work perfectly the first time, unless you're Satoshi Nakamoto. I don't know anyone else who's done it ever. So apart from that single freak event, it seems to me that you pretty much have to think like an engineer. At least where the rubber meets the road. At least where you're actually writing code, you have to switch from the academic mode to the implementation engineer mode.
So I'll give an example where I personally screwed up in my career in the cryptocurrency space. I was a contributor to Ethereum, and I was involved in the early days, especially in a lot of technical discussions, and Gavin Wood went off and designed the entire Ethereum virtual machine. He wrote the yellow paper. That paper really should have been reviewed by experts. There were numerous mistakes, obfuscations, overcomplications, and poor design choices that were made that the Ethereum ecosystem is plagued with, that have contributed to things like the DAO hack and have contributed to things like the parity hack. It's just very easy to make stupid mistakes because of bad engineering principles, meeting with just not following best practices. We paid at IOHK for the first formal spec of the Ethereum virtual machine, and it was done by runtime verification in around 2017. And it took them months to kind of find fact from fiction and sort out this entire design. And at the end of it, they said, this is a terrible design. It should be thrown away and something simpler made. And that's why we created Yella, for example. So did that slow down development? Had Gavin gone through a few stages of review, talking to some domain experts, maybe it would have added 1 or 2 extra months of development time overall for the project. But the outcome of that would have been a much safer ecosystem for everybody in the Ethereum space. So I agree that you have to think like engineers, because at the end of the day, you have to ship product, and academics think forever. It's not lost on me. There is no ending to an academic career. It's like you're carried out in a pine box at some point, or dementia gets you, one of the two. But at the end of the day, there is a trade-off, and if you just go too far in one particular direction and just go with whatever's good, you end up with really bad designs that you have to live with because it's a cryptocurrency, sometimes forever. there are numerous problems with the design of Bitcoin that either couldn't be fixed or were very painful to fix. For example, Bitcoin script was kind of bolted on right towards the end of the development of Bitcoin before it got released. And in the early days, there were problems like one of which actually allowed you to generate Bitcoin out of thin air because you could mismatch the inputs and outputs and just create tokens because of a scripting error. You should talk to Sergio Lerner, for example. He's an InfoSec expert, works on Rootstock, and he found tons of issues with the early days of Bitcoin, which were silently patched, all because this was obviously not Satoshi's area of core competency, and obviously because of the way it was designed and rolled out, there was no anybody there to say maybe that's not such a good idea. And that's my broader point. It's always the broader point. No matter what you're doing, new programming language, virtual machine design, whether consensus algorithm, whatever it happens to be, you need to show it to people who know what they're doing. Even at IOHK, we have Phil Wadler working for us. He's a pretty good programming language guy. He kind of created Haskell and a few other things. And he was working on the Plutus project, but we had to bring in additional people to help Phil get to a point where Plutus got on track, because he was looking at things not in the optimal way, and it kind of spun in the mud for a little while. So even amongst the experts of experts, it's still a good idea to broaden your sampling of people, and you end up getting a far, far better product.
Yep. I do have to correct myself. There were things in Bitcoin that were not correct, like the billions of Bitcoin thing. I don't think that was scripting. I think it was literally like just value overflow.
Yeah, it was an input mismatch. Your inputs could be larger than your outputs. You can just generate Bitcoins from it.
But that's not scripting. That's the Bitcoin script. The problems were things like various opcodes that could be used, for instance, to create loops or infinite loops or things, or to consume too much computation power.
You can validate a script where the inputs are mismatched with the outputs. Isn't that a scripting issue?
No, the input-output summation is not part of the scripting. The scripting just unlocks things.
Okay, fair enough.
But it doesn't matter. It's still an error wherever the error existed. There was something I failed to mention. Adaptability, like having like a beginner's mind, I believe it's called, is important. The ability to learn as if you haven't been down like a long path and you haven't become set in your ways is very important. And that cashes out in terms of leaving room to upgrade, leaving room to make changes without changing the entire world. I think Bitcoin's been quite good at that. Bitcoin has never needed a hard fork for a feature upgrade. It has needed to fix things like the databases and stuff, but it's done quite well. I think that's a philosophy to aim for. Try not to make too many waves when you need to change something. Just my philosophy.
Finally, after all that. This question is for Bernardo, and then it goes into Aggelos. All right, so this provably fair card game that you're actually working on, if you could be so kind and sort of like go into it a little bit, how does it work? And then to direct it at the chief scientist, when will Cardano be able to do this?
Well, the protocols are already published. It's a series of 3 papers. 2 of them are already.
I know you're going to say RTFM, but maybe make it more human friendly.
What I'm saying. First, what I'm saying is the protocols already exist and are already publicly available, and 2 of those papers are already accepted at conferences going through peer review. So it's not really now a matter of research of when it's going to be available. It's a matter of the business side of implementing these things correctly, dealing with the regulation, which is extremely tricky, and getting the service deployed. So the research is done. It's case closed. The way it works is that it allows you to generate a representation of cards that work like a physical card, where you can have it either face up, where you know its value, or face down, where you don't know its value. And you can keep track of this digital representation as the game evolves, so that you know basically that you have the same physical card being turned face up or face down, or being shuffled, and so on and so forth. The basic idea of doing this with cryptography has been discussed for 40 years. It was first proposed in the late 70s, early 80s. The problem is that none of the papers in all these years had actually bothered to understand what are the basic security guarantees that you want from such protocols. And that was, and that's what the main goal you have in any cryptographic work is actually understanding these basic security properties and providing a proof that your scheme actually matches the security properties in some way. And that's something that we worked into doing properly for the first time. And then also adding the integration with the cryptocurrency in such a way that by the end of the game, you actually have a guarantee that people will receive their rewards. Then there's a second problem. In any cryptographic protocol, even if it is secure, some bad actor can just choose to stop responding, to stop interacting and cooperating with the in the protocol. So you need to have some way to incentivize people to actually participate in the protocol, or provide some kind of coercion for them not to behave badly. And that's also something that a cryptocurrency allows you to do. Because if you design your protocol in the right way, you can identify exactly who is acting maliciously and find them. So you find them in an amount of coins. What is a reasonable amount? Then that's a problem of game theory of how much is that person standing to win if they do this attack. Is it advantageous or not? So this is the part. The research part is done. It allows you to play any kind of card games with the regular card operations you would do in a real life card game. But now the much more exciting thing is the generalization that we're working on right now, where you don't just get to play card games. You get to compute any computer program you can write, anything that is computable on top of this infrastructure, and with the same guarantees of privacy of your inputs and of punishing bad actors and of getting the output to actually distribute money according to whatever computation you're doing. So that's the exciting one that's going to be coming out kind of soonish from the research side. Now, for when it's going to be available publicly.
Actually, the guy implementing it's over there. There's Vincent. There was a benchmark discussion about 2 years ago, I fondly recall. So this isn't quite the first time, but it's always nice to have that pressure. And these are really hard protocols to implement, by the way. Really hard.
Okay, guys. I'm afraid we have to wrap it up. You want to give any final remarks before we...
Well, first, thank you for the generosity inviting us. And also, it was great to talk to the Zen guys. It's really cool meeting you guys. So,
Zen Protocol.
Well, Zen Protocol, yeah. There's a lot of Zens now. Zen Cash, Zen Protocol.
Yeah. There's a website I found from the first .com bubble, 2000-ish. It was literally just companies that call themselves Zen. I found this after we call ourselves Zen. But it just seems to pop up. Well, we did pick on a Zen before any other blockchain-based thing started using the name Zen. We weren't the first to produce a blockchain. Actually, it was running in a testnet.
So when can we build Zen Classic? I'm just kidding.
Okay, thank you.